As I mentioned, I was on the St. Croix and Namakagon Rivers last week, and these are some buildings here that you see. These buildings aren't very energy efficient. They're tents. The one on the right there is circa 1983, and the material's falling apart and wasn't very good at all at keeping the rain and snow off me. The big large ones in the middle is circa 2020 and from Menards. And the one on the left is Marmot circa 2012 and did a little bit better. You can see the designs a little bit better there. These were designed for a specific purpose, and that's mainly to be light and easy to carry and go places, not so much to keep in heat and whatnot. So I offer that because when we think about the design of our buildings, it's really important to notice what they were originally made for, and then to think about, as times have changed and history has evolved, what are they meant for now, and how can we better live into what their purpose is and how it can match our relationship with the earth now. These helped me have a particular relationship with the earth this past week. I wouldn't want to have that relationship every single day. Tonight, we've got a great guest speaker to dig into the practicalities of this kind of side of things. Her name is Anne Gerrietts, and she's a civil engineer. She trained at Washington University, also in physics, and she's spent most of her career working with buildings, more than the last dozen years working specifically with churches. She worked for most of that time with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, ELCA, with their Mission Building Fund, in speaking to church groups, just like folks on the call tonight, and helping them think through how to make their buildings better fit their mission and better serve all their congregations. So I was really excited to meet Anne, and really have been impressed with her abilities and her insights into church buildings and helping people work with church buildings. She's also worked with IPL and written some papers with IPL and other things. So I'm excited to turn it over to Anne. Thank you so much, Anne, for being here. And I will let you share your screen and get started.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. I will go ahead and share my screen. There we go. Hey, look at that. Yeah, I've got a handful of slides we're going to kind of talk through. We're going to go through a church building, basically looking at the first looking at the inside and then the outside, and kind of try to talk about some of the key points of places where not only could you save energy, but just looking at your building as how you can possibly retrofit to make it more of a green building. And like Buff said, we'll talk at the end with any questions you have, so feel free to type in the chat and he'll kind of see those, and we'll leave some time at the end here to go through and answer as many questions as possible. So just as a little reiteration of what Buff said, my name is Anne Gerrietts. I am a civil engineer by training, and I actually do have a LEED AP certification, which is the green building classification. And I've worked for the last 13 plus years as a church building consultant. And so I want to also take a moment here and thank Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light for inviting me to do this presentation. So, let's see here. Oh, there we go. So like I said, we're going to take a look at the inside of the building, looking at the whole building, go room by room, talk about the building shell a little, and then we're going to go to the outside and talk about transportation, the landscaping, and then kind of hit on some of the bigger renewable energy items. But kind of the focus of this presentation really is meant to be more, what can you do tomorrow? What are some smaller things, steps you can take, and kind of go from those smaller steps to the bigger steps. So not just talking the big, renewable energy options, but also talking about some of the smaller detail things, and kind of like I always like to tell groups, the what can you do tomorrow ideas. So looking at the whole building, the very first thing that I always tell groups is fixing those leaks. And the picture is of the water, but really we're going to talk later about other options for different leaks. You're going to find a theme of this is going to be maintenance. Everything from fixing leaks, but also just maintenance of your equipment. When things are used the way they were meant to be used and are built the way that they were supposed to be built, that's when they're going to be the most efficient. So looking at the fixing leaks, particularly with water, I know many church buildings that just have that leaky sink in the basement bathroom. The amount of water that you can lose through that then you were, again, thinking efficiency that you're paying for, just by fixing that little leak, it can really start to add up. And one of the things that I wanted to mention specific to that is at my own house, I live in Roseville, Minnesota. And so Roseville actually let me know on my bill that I had a leak. So that's something that, depending on which city you live in, I mentioned that just because that was something that I had no idea that was going on. And because of that, I was able to fix the leak and saw a dramatic drop in my water bill. So fixing those leaks is actually a huge step that you can do tomorrow that is going to make a big impact. Another one to go with that is just turning off the lights. And besides just turning off the lights, other equipment, while not in use, that's another key, particularly, again, thinking of your church, where not all items are used on a regular basis. And so if you can turn equipment off when it's not in use, I'm thinking particularly nowadays with a lot of the AV equipment that's being used, that's a big one, being able to just turn off some of that AV equipment so it's not frequently on and running when no one's using it. But to go with that is, I'm sure some of you have heard of phantom electricity or phantom loads, TVs, chargers. That's a big one that people don't know about, is that if you leave your phone charger in and just leave it plugged in, it's creating a phantom load. Coffee pots, there's a big one. Coffee pots, microwaves, anything that's not being used on a regular basis, that needs to be turned off, and ideally would be unplugged. But now again, here's the key to this is, I know a lot of places, particularly the coffee pots and the microwave, and you're like, oh, I have to dig behind it to get to the plug-in. Power strips are your friends. If you can put all of those things onto a power strip that you can flip one switch on Sunday morning to turn everything on, or even thinking of your office, if there's a bunch of copiers, and again, maybe a coffee pot in the office, again, anything you can put on a power strip that you can turn off at the end of the day, because when the power strip is off, it's like unplugging it. Unlike if you just leave the coffee pot plugged in, it's still using some of that phantom load. So anything you can do to turn that equipment off is going to be, again, another huge savings. And then LED bulbs. LED bulbs are probably one of the most well-known things you can do. A lot of places, a lot of churches, this is kind of one of their first things they go after, mostly because they can cost 75 to 90% less to operate. They last like 25 times longer. But one of the things people don't know about them is they are actually brighter and more consistent with light. So if you get somebody telling you, oh, the LEDs, though, we don't like them, they're hard, people can't see, they actually are brighter. They're just misleading because of that kind of cleaner light. So that's a big one, is being able to switch those out. The other one, particularly for churches, that I always try to mention is you're always thinking about the sanctuary, but really the majority of your lights are in other places. It's your office, it's the classrooms, it's the hallways, so the sanctuary is great, and absolutely let's look at how to replace them, but you got to think about the rest of the building. And those are actually a lot easier changes than trying to change the sanctuary lights. So one of the big bonuses of LEDs over the CFLs is the fluorescent lights. I'm sure many of you have heard when CFLs first came out, you couldn't switch, they'd be like, oh, but then we have to change all the ballasts on the fluorescent lights to be able to put in the CFL light bulbs. Well, with LEDs, that's actually a little different. You don't actually have to buy a new ballast to put in LED tubes. You can actually convert your existing ones if they're T8s, which is the most common. You can actually convert them and put those LED tubes in. Or nowadays, the light manufacturers are starting to get smarter. And like, for example, there's a Philips tube that actually has what they call plug and play, which means basically you can just stick it in and it adjusts for that ballast. So you don't actually have to do anything. You don't have to do any retrofitting. They just fit. So again, I mentioned that just because I know a lot of churches, again, when those CFL light bulbs came out, that was the big concern was, oh no, like, well, we're not going to replace all of our light fixtures just to try to put these in, versus now with the LEDs, it's a lot easier. And then the last one on the slide there, the exit signs. This is one that I'm sure many of you haven't even thought of, but you probably have multiple exit signs in your building. And that's a light that's on 24/7. So if you can switch out those to LED lights, again, it's not huge, but when you start talking about $10 per sign, that can start to add up. And particularly, again, most buildings have multiple exit signs. Plus, with the LEDs, those lights are brighter. And again, which makes that sign stand out more, which is making it actually safer. Couple other whole building things. We're looking at earth-friendly cleaning products. I've got a fun update on that because I know, particularly with COVID, that this has been another hot topic. Trying to switch from all those green products that we'd been kind of promoting and people had been using, and then all of a sudden with the pandemic, it's, oh, wait a second, but we have to have something that can actually kill this. And so it became kind of a struggle for a lot of faith communities about what do we do? We want to be able to have these earth-friendly products, but we need to be concerned about the safety in the building. Well, you'll be glad to know there actually are some earth-friendly products that also can kill COVID. And so what you want to look for on any of these products are an EPA or green seal label. So those are kind of the key. And one in particular it's called a DFE, which is designed for the environment. And it would be right on the label, it will say that. But what that means is that product is pesticide free. And that's what we're looking for, is that as long as it's pesticide free, it's going to be much more friendly for the earth for more of a earth-friendly cleaning product. So of those, I did a quick hunt before this presentation. Right now there are 21 COVID-killing products that have that DFE designation. So there are actually 21 different options of earth-friendly cleaning products that the EPA says will kill that COVID virus. So if somebody says, oh, but we have to have this, harmful chemical because we have to be able to kill this particular virus, that's actually not true. There are different options out there. And my favorite part about that is at least one of the options is actually made by Lysol. So it's not like it's an obscure, you know, there's a Lysol and there's a couple Purell options on that list. So, and that's something that if you're curious about, you can actually go to the EPA.gov and they'll actually have that listed. So you can go onto that website and see their product list. The reason, besides the pesticides, another reason we're looking at these is because of this VOC. And if you're not familiar with what that means, that is a volatile organic compound, or a better way to think about it is a low VOC means it doesn't smell. It's that smell that's coming off of it. You know, when somebody puts fresh paint on the walls or puts in new carpet, that smell you're getting is the chemical smell, and that's that VOC. So what we want to think about again is if you do any painting, if you put in any flooring in, and actually, again, any of your chemicals that you use, that they have low VOCs. So that's going to make your building a safer place because you're not going to be breathing in chemicals. And then pre-cycling and recycling. So I feel like recycling, most of you are familiar with at this point. You know, we've all been trained to use the different containers for our different objects or plastic. The one I want to kind of highlight is pre-cycling, because I think that's something that people don't think about a lot. And with that, what we mean is just bringing in fewer objects into the building that we're then going to have to throw out. So if you start to think about, wait a second, if I bring that in, we have to be able to throw it back out again at some point, then that's something that when we talk about pre-cycling, we want to try to eliminate. So, and we'll talk more about that when we get to some of the individual rooms. The last one then is this buy local. And again, this is going to be kind of something we'll talk about with some of the other, in some of the other items in other rooms. But when we talk about buying local, one of the key things is that then it doesn't have to be transported very far. So it cuts down on the transportation. So we're talking about, you know, less fossil fuel use to get it to you. And if you buy local, lots of times that cuts down on the packaging. You know, they don't have to wrap it as much. So you're talking less paper and plastic use for packaging. You're talking lower transportation. And then also just thinking more, again, of faith communities. And it's important to support your local community. So it's kind of a win-win all around, because, you know, as a faith community, you want to be part of the community and that you're located in. And so this is a nice way to link not only for the green building reasons, but also to help build your community. So next we're going to go look at each room by room, and this is kind of just the layout of some of the rooms we're going to look at. But we'll go ahead and start with the mechanical room. This is kind of a key room. The very first step I mentioned here, which again, I think many of you are familiar with, is getting an energy audit. And depending on exactly where you live, sometimes you can, you know, the local energy company sometimes will offer them. There's other options. You can hire people to do energy audits. So there's a lot of options. The key to energy audits is it's a great starting point. And that's what you have to remember is the energy audit is supposed to be the kickoff. It's supposed to be the, hey, we've seen these things, and then kind of put you into motion. So one of the things with that, you know, that advantage of these energy audits is they will lots of times look at your bills. And that's something that's kind of handy, is that they can, you know, look at your bills, they can run that blower test, and that's what you see. You know, if any of you have had this done, it's actually kind of fun to watch them, you know, seal up your door and then turn on the fans and and watch this blower test in action. So that's a great starting point. And that's what I want to kind of emphasize with that is that great, I fully support them, but make sure then you use those steps and you do something. And again, we'll talk a little more about that later. The other piece to that people don't always think about is that maintenance contract. And since we're talking about the mechanical room, a maintenance contract for not only your HVAC, but for your water heater, whenever something's running well, it's running well, it's well kept up, it's maintained, that's going to be the most efficient. And so we'll talk about it a little bit more in here in just a second. But one of the key things that I always like to say is that, you know, you can throw out your equipment and you can get the new Energy Star, but the current one you have also can be efficient as long as it's running well. And so kind of that very first step is, you know, like tomorrow, let's not cut out your HVAC and get some fancy new thing. But in the meantime, let's make sure that what you've got works right and you're not wasting energy trying to run a machine that's just not running at its best. So those maintenance contracts actually are a huge step about optimizing the equipment and the performance that's going to help you save energy. The programmable thermostats, again, this is one I feel like a lot of people have heard a lot about. With churches in particular, the being able to set it for Sunday morning, setting it for your meeting, the advantage you have is you almost always know when someone's going to be in the building, because you can literally look at the schedule, look at the calendar for the building and see. And so that's where a programmable thermostat really can help any church, just so you're not running the heater, you know, trying to heat up the whole building all the time. So energy efficient equipment then, and this is kind of back to what I was saying about your HVAC, your heating and cooling systems. The key to that is to reducing the load you've got on the whole building first, and then let's talk about the energy efficient equipment. And when I say that, what I mean is we're going to talk about some steps later on about ways to improve your building envelope and keep your heat or cool in the building. That while it's a wonderful idea to get energy efficient equipment, like an energy efficient furnace, the first step I would have you do is some of these other steps first, to talk about talking about the insulation and the leaks and those types of things. I just realized I completely stepped over the water heater. So let's go back and talk about the water heater. So the water heaters, again, are another big one for churches, because particularly if you've got an older building, the water heater was probably put close to the kitchen because that was the main source for needing the water. And then pipes run almost the length of your church to get to the bathroom on the other side. And so when you start to think about water heaters, they needed to be kept warm enough to be able to create hot water on the other side of the building. So there's a couple things here. First of all, we want to talk about insulating it. So putting a blanket around it. If your water heater is older than a couple years, I mean, usually we'll say 5, you know, is that you want to look at getting in a blanket insulation around your water heater. What that's going to let you do is not have the water heater's temperature set so hot, and it will hold on to that heat. So you don't need to keep it so hot because you know you're going to lose some of that heat. Then hopefully that makes sense. So basically by putting this blanket on it, you're going to be able to lower the temperature of your water heater by about 10 degrees. Default is usually 130, 140. Ideally, you want to set it down to like 110, 120. And not only then will that save you, about 5%, but that also is going to help no one will ever get scalded by the heat, which again, it's a fun little side benefit. So when you put that insulation blanket on, like I said, probably if your water heater is at least 5 years old, the other key is to insulate the pipes coming out. And we'll talk about lots of times insulating the first 5 feet, but ideally, the more of that pipe you can insulate, the better. So same kind of concept. What that's going to do is that means as it travels to get to the other side of the building, it's going to keep warm longer. And so you're going to have less heat loss as the water's traveling, so that by the time it gets there, it'll still be warm, which again is going to allow you to keep that temperature lower. because otherwise what's happening is people crank the temperature on the water heater so high because they're trying to make sure that when it gets to where it's going, it's still warm. Well, this way we're going to take away some of the water or some of the heat loss on the way. And so again, those are kind of some fairly cheap things you can do that are going to make a huge impact: insulating that water heater, insulating the pipes. And then the other thing I want to kind of bring back up is that maintenance. If you can regularly maintain that water heater, eliminating that sediment that's in the water heater is also going to make it run more efficient, which again is going to help you save energy.
And we had one quick question come in about that programmable thermostat.
Oh, sure.
Do those programmable thermostats work with hot water boiler systems?
Oh, that's a great question. I know it depends on how, was it, because this, as long as you have a thermostat of some kind, it should. So that's the question, is how it's currently set up. I know a lot of them still have the old knob ones, and in that case it should. The other thing you can do though is if for some reason it doesn't currently have a thermostat, there is something called a volt. Let's see if I get it right. It's a volt timer, which is kind of a crazy thing, but basically it just cuts the power on and off on it to some level. And so that's another thing that you could use if it didn't. But like I said, even those old systems nowadays, they usually still have a thermostat. And if they have a thermostat, you should be able to attach one. Yeah, good question. In the kitchen, again, we've got our options for Energy Star appliances. Similar to the HVAC, first step, whatever you have, make sure it's running well. That's going to be the most most energy efficient given today, is just making sure that current system runs well. But if you have to replace something, that's when you want to look for that Energy Star. And that's just going to have so much less energy use. Anyone who has, particularly for some reason, it seems like old fridges are usually the big culprits in most churches. And I'm just going to pick on some churches I've seen, but the second fridge for flowers almost always is the bad fridge that just sucks energy. So again, ideally running well, but then as they start to go, start replacing them with those higher energy efficient. A couple other things though about running those appliances well. So you want to keep your refrigerator at about 35 to 38 degrees. And the freezer should be at about 0 or below. But the key is a full refrigerator runs more efficiently. So if you're, again, I'm going to go back to pick on the flower fridge. So if you've got the flower fridge that is mostly empty most of the week, that is running at the least efficient possibility. So what again, thinking of a cheap, easy thing you can do, you just want to fill the space, because if it's full, it runs more efficiently. So lots of times I'll recommend to congregations to fill jugs of water and fill that fridge with water, because then that will run more efficiently during the week while there's nothing in it. Or, and those are easy, like, pull out. If all of a sudden you have a big dinner and you want to, stick something back in, you can take them in and out easily. But again, the fuller the refrigerator or freezer is, the more efficient it's going to run. And so again, that's a real cheap fix to at least make what you've got run more efficiently. But if you do have extras and you don't need them, that's where we want to go back to unplugging them. If you only need that third fridge for the dinner you serve, your big annual dinner, unplug it in the meantime and kind of combine down so that you're only using, the least amount of equipment as you need. Reusable dishware and towels. This and actually the composting are going to kind of go together. This is another one that's always a big variable. There's two sides to the argument. Well, if we use the reusable dishes, but now we have to wash them, versus do we use paper plates and then we don't have to use the water and the electricity? So unfortunately, the answer is it depends on how often you're serving, how efficient your dishwasher is. Are you washing by hand? Where are you getting your energy from? Are you creating your own solar energy where it's not that big of a deal to then be using more energy? So there's a lot of variables. I guess you're going to have to think about it on a church by church basis. One of the things, though, I want you to think about is if you are going to use a disposable dishware, think about that compostable products. So anything you can recycle or compost, and this is where kind of tying into the composting in the garden, if you can compost on site, if you can get, a lot of the cities nowadays will let you get kind of a bucket barrel system that then you can compost through the city. That's where, again, if you're thinking about like a dinner, if you do one large meal, annual picnic a year, that's where the city will gladly give you compostable, at least in the cities here, they'll give you compostable things that you can throw away. Any of your potato starch silverware or your, cane fiber, sugar cane fiber plates. So again, thinking of as you're thinking of how you use your dishes, that's kind of the key point. Because if you're doing coffee every week and you can run your dishwasher, once or twice, that might not be that big of a deal in terms of the water and the electricity, as opposed to the plates you would have to buy that have to be transported to you, that have to be packaged in plastic, and then you're going to throw them away. So again, you have to kind of weigh your use on those. That also kind of leads us well into the toilet rooms. Talking about earth-friendly paper products, and I'm going to also kind of tie that to hand towels versus the air, the air dispensers to dry your hands, the hand dryers. Again, things have changed. We would have been 100%, use your use the air, hand dryers. But when we started to talk about COVID again, we don't want to be spitting germs into the air. Well, they're actually not as bad as they seem. Things come down to, again, it's going to be a variable on the situation. How is that the hand warmer, or is it warm air? Because warm air is about 80% less efficient than an air blade. If you're familiar with those air blades that you stick your hands in, those also, a lot of them have HEPA filters. And the key to this is when they talk about the germs flying in the air from one of the hand dryers, if your hands are actually washed correctly, then that becomes not an issue, because you're not spitting up germs because your hands were clean. So again, there's kind of some variables on that. On the other hand, if you feel safer with paper, kind of the paper towels, those can be are compostable. So, again, you kind of lose on the fact that they have to be transported, and again, their packaging and the manufacturing of them. But on the other hand, you could also compost them. And so it ends up being a comfort level. One of the things I'd say to think about is the variable on the situation of, again, how often are you using them? Is it just Sunday mornings, or do you have a school, or is it in the building that's, using the bathroom on a regular basis? So that's where, again, weighing the towels versus the electricity, that's something you'll have to think about. Couple other key things. We talk about dual flush toilets, also low flow, or you can actually even retrofit tanks so that with an insert so that they can be low flow. My biggest thing with those is education, though, because in my experience, particularly with the dual flush toilets, is if someone hasn't explained them, it doesn't really do a lot of good because people are just going to push whatever button then they feel like. So having some kind of a sign that explains what's going on, or an education to your congregation, just to let them know, here's what's going on, here's what, here's which button to push, that's going to be key. The low flow faucet aerators, this is a great way to, again, cut down on your water use. You can kind of see in the picture there, it's literally just the end piece that screws into the sink itself. My biggest thing with these is they are wonderful for bathrooms. If you really want to think about if you want to put it into the kitchen, they're great for still having a great water stream for washing, like for washing your hands or even washing dishes. If you're trying to fill a pot of water and there's a low flow faucet aerator on, it's going to take a while. So again, if the best place for those is where it's not about the volume of water, it's about what the water needs to be able to reach. So again, if you're thinking about washing your hands, bathrooms are great places for these. And again, they can, probably cost you about $2 to install, and they will cut your water use in about half. So they're another big bang for your buck. The last one, I think a lot of places again have thought of this one. Occupancy sensors, just again, thinking particularly of the bathrooms so that the lights go out. My one word of warning is make sure you get one with a timer that you can set, because a lot of the automatic ones are really short time periods, and you don't want somebody stuck in the bathroom in the dark. I've heard some really horror stories between like particularly small children been stuck in the dark. So make sure you get one that's got a timer on it. Looking at classrooms, one of the bigger things is we want to talk about earth-friendly art toys, art supplies. Again, we're going to talk about natural floorings with that low VOC that we already talked about the smell. I just want to hit a couple of the natural flooring options, looking particularly at cork, bamboo, hardwood, wool carpet, that's always a good one too. But the one I wanted to make sure to mention, there is something called, see if I can say this right, linoleum, marmalum, marmalum, yeah. So basically, it's like linoleum, but it's made of a earth-friendly product. And so I put that out there because I know a lot of churches have linoleum just because it's easy and it's easy to clean. Look, there is actually an earth-friendly option of that. So let me see here. And then looking again, anywhere in, particularly they talk about classrooms or meeting rooms, having any cabinets made of sustainable materials. Again, thinking about things that can be local, things that are made from rapidly renewable materials. Looking in the offices then, again, we have our Energy Star equipment options. I'll just reiterate the power strip option of being able to turn that off so that someone doesn't have to go and dig behind things and unplug. But if you can put all of your office equipment on a power strip that you can turn off at the end of the night, that's wonderful. Obviously, a lot of paper is going to need to get used. So we want to talk about how to thinking about how you can best reduce it, but then also recycle that. Carpet tiles is one that you might not have thought of. This is a good location to put in carpet tiles because there's certain areas that'll get worn and you can pull out just those tiles. So already it helps in terms of earth friendly because you don't have to have the manufacturing to recreate the carpets and replace them. But here's the fun fact about carpet tiles. They are not installed with adhesives. And so it also helps your air quality. So that keeping a low VOC that we talked about earlier, that really helps. And so that's kind of a nice side advantage of carpet tiles. And then the last one, which I highly recommend, again, thinking of a nice, fairly cheap solution is task lighting. You'll notice that in a lot of offices. Instead of having to have the overhead lights on all the time, if people can have task lighting where they can turn on a lamp, like maybe when the sun shifts and they don't get as much light in their window, that is really going to help your electrical bill by not having to have all the lights on in the office all the time. The gathering area, or I like to sometimes call it the lobby or the narthex, this is a key place for communication. So when you start to talk about communication of how are we celebrating green, how are we talking about what things we're doing as a congregation and a community, this is kind of the key point for, again, for that education. I can't overemphasize that educating your congregation is really kind of the key to anything you're doing, because that's how they'll take it home and apply it also to their own home. Otherwise, if you serve coffee in your area, fair trade goods, I always like to talk them up, because that's actually a sustainability level, a trusted sustainability label that allows for any product you buy that's a fair trade good means it's been produced with sustainable practices. And they guarantee, thinking again of now your faith-based community, that's also a good way to support fair wages. So anything from fair goods is done sustainably and with fair wages. And then the last one here, this is kind of a key one that people don't ever think about, which is if you can install and maintain entrance mats, it seems like just oh, isn't that nice? But what that will do is that keeps the dirt closer to the front door. And so you can regularly clean those mats versus having to regularly clean the entire hallway or the rest of the building. So it actually does end up being a green building initiative to have those mats, because that allows you to just clean that one space as opposed to having to bring in chemicals to clean the whole building. And of course, those entrance mats can be made of recycled material. So it's kind of a win-win. The worship space, one of the big ones with the worship space is talking about flexible seating, because that allows you to use it as more of a multi-purpose space. So when you're talking about any main meeting room in your building, what that flexible seating allows you to do is let that be used by others, which means that you don't have to add on to your building. Here's my phrase I always like to share. The greenest building is an existing building. I'm going to say that again for those of you who've got old buildings. The greenest building is an already existing building, because since it's already there and it's already taking up that footprint, that means that it's already better than adding on, where you're now taking up more green space. Now, obviously, sometimes you have to do that, but that's where this, if you start to think about flexible seating, what that means is that you can use that space for more, which might be able to slow down your need to add on to your building. The other key one I want to mention on this slide is actually ceiling fans. And I say this because almost every sanctuary I think I've seen has got some ceiling fans on the very top. And I love to ask building committees, when do you turn them on? And they're like, oh, we use them in the summer, to keep cool. Well, those ceiling fans were probably put up there for winter. I say that because ideally they're reversible, but if they turn, and this is, okay, I have to read my notes to make sure I get it right. If they turn clockwise, then they're made for winter. If they're counterclockwise, that's for summer. Because when they're clockwise for winter, what they're doing is they're trying to create an updraft and push the hot air down, which again will make it so that it feels warmer, lower, and that's going to allow you to not run your heater as much. versus in summer, when they're counterclockwise, then they should be blowing down and helping air move and giving you a breeze. So take a look at your ceiling fans. And I know it seems counterintuitive, but if they can turn clockwise, they're meant for winter. And if you, I know a lot of places, they're like, yeah, there's a little chain up there. If you can get them, put them on a switch. Otherwise, there are options now that they can be Wi-Fi controlled. And so you can just flip them from your phone, basically. So something to look at. Eliminating flooring. I'm going to mention this just real quick. Obviously, you know, cleaning is going to be an issue. And so that's a big part of it. And then not having carpets with adhesives, that's also is going to help to eliminate that altogether, is going to help the green building. I'm also going to throw out, though, polished concrete. If you can pull up a corner of your carpet in your sanctuary and it's concrete underneath, polishing concrete can be a really easy way to make it look like you have a marble floor without having to pay for a marble floor. So otherwise, obviously, worshiping outside in the nice summer days is wonderful. You don't have to run electric. You don't have to run your HVAC in your building. And it's a nice way to do some education pieces. Quick look at the weatherization of the building. So this is probably my favorite slide, which is going to sound a little crazy, but this is the things I talk about where I'm like, your biggest bang for your buck. This is it. Caulking and weather stripping, fixing those leaks again. I mean, that's the thing. We're fixing those leaks in the building so that the heat doesn't get out. The key to this is, and I even mentioned it there on replacing windows and doors. Many of the buildings I've been to, they talk about fixing the windows, fixing the windows, fixing the windows. And the doors are just as bad, if not worse. So please, as you're thinking about that, also look at your doors. I don't care if they're wood or they're glass, but a lot of those, that's where the majority of the heat is going out, because there's leaks around it and they're old doors. The other thing with the caulking and weather stripping and really just insulating in general, around the windows, when you start talking about replacing windows and doors, you want to think specifically about sealing the trim areas around them and behind them. And next Sunday when you're in your building, hold your hand next to the window and then hold it over the trim next to it. And many of these, that trim is way colder than the actual window because there's no sealing or insulation in that behind the trim. So again, that's kind of my little hint from things, baseboards, moldings, windows and door casings. Think about getting some insulation behind that. And then just in general, you know, when churches were built in the turn of the previous century, you know, they put insulation in the walls. It was newspaper. It's been gone for 70 years, you know. So a lot of churches no longer, you know, the buildings no longer have insulation. And so that's by far the biggest bang for your buck. Anytime a church would say to me they were going to replace their HVAC unit, you know, I'm like, that's great, but let's get your insulation and keep the heat you're producing already in your building. So I know we're running kind of short on time already, so I apologize in advance that I'm going to run a little long, but a couple more slides. Sun control is another way to look at the outside and thinking about how the weather affects it. The biggest thing on this to me is think about the farmhouse. Shade trees on the south and evergreens on the north or northwest. Both of those are some very green ways to help the energy conservation in your building. The shade trees are going to give you that shade in summer and help the sun beating down on your building. And the evergreens on the north or northwest are going to stop the wind from blowing towards your building and act as another layer. So for those of you who are from more rural areas, which is more where I grew up, you'll see it on the farmhouses all the time. I mean, they knew what they were doing. There's a reason they've got trees on both sides of their houses. And that's a wonderful thing that you can implement again, and it helps your green space outside. The other one is just a quick word about roofs. Metal roofs are a wonderful way to, if you ever need to replace your roof, I would look at a metal roof. It's a wonderful way to not only not have to constantly mess with leaks. The average metal roof is maintenance free for about 50 years. So for those of you on building or property committees, that alone makes it appealing. They can do some great things architecturally, but they're also can be made reflective. And again, and it helps your sun control by having that surface where it can heat up some, the snow can slide off, but at the same time, it can reflect back so that you're not getting that heating up in your attic. And then just a quick couple things about the outside. Transportation, again, this is where it starting to get to some of the bigger picture green initiatives. I mean, obviously offering any kind of ride shares, putting on bike racks. I mean, ideally, we'd love it if everybody would walk to church. Wouldn't that be fabulous? But that's just not practical. So one of the things we'll talk about is preferred parking for carpools, which is a great way to, also invite your neighbor to come with you, is if you can carpool to worship is always helpful. The other thing is nowadays there's options for, we're starting to see more and more electric chargers. And so this is something I'd say, it's going to take some legwork and to dig into, but maybe that's something you can offer. Offering, like you'll start to see them around here again, like different places you'll start to see stores and government buildings will have electric car chargers. And this might be something to look into, is something you could provide. The only thing I want to add with that is that if you're looking at your parking, the other thing besides preferred parking for like carpools or more of electric cars, make sure you still have parking for visitors. That's my church building consultant hat coming on, that you want to make sure that whatever you do, you've not now kicked the visitor parking farther back. You want to make sure the visitor parking is still up there in the good spots next to the carpools, because you still want to be welcoming to all. And then admission reduction, just if you've got a school that does pickup, trying to have them not sit there and idle their cars. That's also, again, is a huge green option for our climate. Looking then at landscaping, anything you do in terms of drought resistant plants, rainwater collection, these are all good ideas. I know my church here in the cities has added a rain garden, and there's all kinds of resources, that you can look at for how to install those, everything from do-it-yourselves to getting help. The one I did wanted to mention, and this is for my rural churches, the greenest parking lot you can have is a gravel parking lot, which I don't always recommend, obviously, speaking as a female, if you happen to be wearing heels, gravel parking is not fun. But just a little, if you next time you're at your council meeting, say, hey, we put in a green parking lot because you have gravel. So there are options though for some pervious paving. I've seen some churches do like half and half, making it so that maybe the visitor parking is the nice, is a nice asphalt solid surface, but maybe for the overflow, that the members will be on, they'll do some pervious paving. One thing I did find, I just want to throw out there is, in Shoreview, actually, there's installed on a street, there is actually some pervious paving if you ever want to look at one. So that does work in Minnesota, because that's usually the pushback I'll get on that, is that the freeze thaw, but there actually is some in Minnesota. And then just the last here, like I said, I just wanted to mention them. These are options for renewable energy. You know, obviously you got your geothermal, you've got your solar, your wind energy options, and even just buying green power. All of these are things that I would say, like particularly, I've seen a lot of geothermal go in. It's going to be a conversation with your architect. Solar power, I'm actually going to point you back to Buff on that one for some hints and some ways to go about it. Interfaith Power and Light actually does have some resources for these types of things. So, which leads me into kind of my last slide, which is just a couple additional resources. Besides, like I said, I would definitely look at Interfaith Power and Light's resources, not only Minnesota, but the national. They've got some great resources. A couple on top of that I know of is the EnergyStar.gov. They actually have a section that's just for congregations. So if you're looking for resources or technical support, they actually have a separate line and a separate group for congregations. So that ends up being a nice addition. And then, as Buff said, I worked for many years for the ELCA, for the Mission Investment Fund. And so LutheransRestoringCreation.org is a great site, which even if you're not Lutheran, you can go look at. They actually have a lot of tips and links actually to other resources. So they kind of do a lot of collating of other resources. So that's a good one, again, if you're just looking for some general information. They also do, for those who are Lutheran, they also do group meetings and things like that. And then I just put a quick line in for funding. Many of the denominations, different denominations, have church building funds. So I would say that's definitely a question to your church leaders of, does your particular denomination have a church building fund that can give loans to support these? The one I listed though, there's the UCC church actually has a building fund called Cornerstone that gives loans specific for care creation projects that reduce carbon footprint. And they've got a special loan rate for anything that's a green project, basically. And a lot of the others, again, almost all the different denominations, if they've got a building fund, they will fund green projects. But this one I know had a specifically special rate if you were doing that. So, and that's something that, again, if you have questions on, I can always talk more about. So again, I apologize for running over, but I guess if there's any questions.
That's fine, Anne. Thank you,
Yeah.
man. What a treasure trove of information and walking us through that whole building approach. I really like that and appreciate so many little details there. That is fantastic. I'd like to speak about some next steps, and then let's come back for those who want to stay, and we'll cover questions. I've seen a few in the chat, and for those who want to stick around, we'll have time for some more discussion. If you would, let's see, I'm going to share my screen here. So you've heard some great things tonight, and you're all fired up and ready to go. Where do you go from here? Well, clearly you can work with Anne. She's a consultant, and you've seen the information and wisdom she has there. She's a great one. We'll make sure that in the email that goes out, you have her contact information. Some other folks that we work with that I want to make sure you know about. Interchange is a nonprofit organization that does free energy audits and has some services for nonprofits. So you're a nonprofit if you're a faith community, and you can get a free energy audit and get started with Interchange. They're a great first step if you haven't kind of put your foot in the water on this. Another organization that we work with is Minify. Jeremy Davis here seated. He's somebody that we've worked with closely, and he's a consultant, and he can come in like Anne and look at your building and work with you. He's a contractor also, so he subs out the work that he subscribes or suggests, and he can oftentimes, create his own income out of the savings that you will generate from the things that he recommends. And finally here, you could go a little bit more robust route with Lighting House. Lighting House is a full service engineering and construction firm that specializes in energy efficiency and renewable energy. Your contact there is Alex Getstead, and he can help you with a lot of kind of projects like that. All these three companies that we've mentioned have a great track record. We've worked with them. They've done projects. They've shown effectiveness for their clients, and we would recommend any of these folks.
Hi, Buff. This is Alex here too. If it's okay, can I take a quick 30 seconds? And
yeah, you can jump in here, Alex. Yeah.
And thank you, Anne, for that wonderful presentation. I like what you said about exit signs. One thing I realized during your presentation was, we do security cameras also. And that is just a phantom load, I'm sure, for many of your congregations, if you have them. If you have a 16 camera system, old system, they use up to 10 amps of power. That's like basically running a space heater all the time, 24/7. The new ones use only 2 amps. So it's like LED lights, they use that much less. Yeah, we specialize in energy savings and electric vehicle charging. Most of the things you've mentioned. In particular, if you're in Minneapolis, there's a 20% extra subsidy that the city of Minneapolis will give your nonprofits and churches, and that's a really exciting program as well. And we also offer free consultations for any of this. In particular, a lot of churches, they have what's called a peak demand charge on their electric bill. I don't know how many of you have seen your electric bill and figured out, Excel doesn't always like to tell you this, but some of you are billed based on your maximum energy usage, and they bill you extra for that. So if you turn on all the lights at one time and you have a bunch of people in your church at the same time, you're running space heaters, coffee, the caramel roll warmer, whatever dish you have, they will bill you extra for that, for the high demand that your church is using at that time. And we can consult with you to reduce that demand load, but also help you change your bill over to a standard, just normal kilowatt hour bill. And if you have over 25,000 square feet of building, then there are additional programs too, where they'll give you discounts on your energy bill too. So a lot of economical solutions here, but yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Alex, for those tips there and jumping in. And as I mentioned to everybody, we will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow to everyone who registered with all the contacts and all the information, plus a recording of the webinar tonight. So thanks again to everybody who came. And for anybody who'd like to stick on, Anne, we're going to go back to Anne with some questions. We've got a few here in the chat. As you were talking about ceiling fans, Anne, one person asked, are those to be used only when people are present, or is there value in using those at other times? Or
Yeah, well, when they're blowing down, so when we're talking summer, definitely only when people are there, because the goal is that as air moves, the way a ceiling fan works is it's not that it actually lowers the temperature, it's that the air blows by you, making you feel cooler. So for the summertime, yeah, you only want to run them when there's people there. In winter, they are meant to kick the heat down. And so the other piece with that is that as you run them, usually you run them on low, because you don't want the feeling of air going past people. You want it just to move the air. And so if that can push the heat down, and the thermostat then, which is controlling, the heat temperature, is lower, so that actually would keep that down. So then they might be worth running, when people aren't there. So summer, definitely not if people aren't there, but in winter, it could actually be of value.
Thank you.
Yeah. Again, that's a great question.
Yeah, good question. Another question we had regarding film on windows, shade film to block out the sun. Is that of much use? Do you see value to that, or?
I haven't seen a lot of it in Minnesota. I mean, I'm just, that because in winter, we actually do want that heat coming in to help heat up the heat inside the building. Now, churches I've worked with in Texas, that becomes a huge, we absolutely talk about putting film on those to help that heat load. Again, that's where in Minnesota, it ends up being a little of a plus minus kind of thing, because in winter, we do want the sun coming in to heat. So yeah, I mean, you can do it, but you have to think about the location and exactly where it is. And is it gonna save you enough to make it worth losing that heat in winter? Yeah.
Got it. Give a little shout out here to Dwight Wagenius, our former board chair, and his comment about remembering that electrifying is always a good move when we're talking about reducing carbon emissions.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly in Minnesota, because Minnesota has a fairly good mix of lower electrical production, lower carbon emission as a state. So good point there, Dwight. And the improvement in technologies is coming all the time with better electrifying options for things that have traditionally been more. Do you know much about that, Anne? Do you want to speak to that?
I mean, really, like just what you said. I mean, it's just technology is improved so much of like so many things. I mean, everything from it used to be, you'd never want to heat with electric, but there again, that's even better. I mean, everything, technology. The light bulbs is another great example. Technology just has gotten better and better.
That's good. Are there other questions that folks have you want to put in the chat, or anybody want to? We have a number of people on the call, so it might be best if folks raise their hand, but I'm glad to pitch any more questions.
While you're kind of looking for that, I guess I could explain a little bit more about what I do besides these energy audits.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, with my building consulting, this has always been a piece of it, kind of the green building piece. But a big piece of what I do actually then was related to looking at your building, of how it relates to your ministry, talking about how welcoming it is, and trying to give you, again, related specifically to the building and construction and remodeling or adding on, and looking at kind of the whole building, and again, seeing if it's serving the ministry that you're trying to do. And so this green building ends up being to me at least, a fun piece of that.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Yes.
Yeah, to that, what Anne just said, she was out to our church in Golden Valley in 2018. She does an excellent job of what she had just described to you in terms of looking at the whole church and then what it does for the ministry and what you're looking at. But my question is, we have a 60-year-old building, quite large, with an education wing hanging on it with boiler issues. Is it practical to think in terms of electrical, whatever, boilers or whatever you might call it, or geothermal, or
yeah,
is that?
I mean, I think
we're looking at that now.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, particularly with the geothermal, I mean, I always would tell congregations to ask, like have somebody run some numbers for you. Usually with geothermal, the issue becomes, do you have a place for it on the land? That usually ends up being the bigger issue. But that's definitely something worth looking at. The other thing with boilers in particular is looking at, when you talk about, do we replace it with electric, looking at stages, like as opposed to having one that does a whole big section, can we do smaller pieces throughout the building, like zoning it basically? Can we zone it? Yeah. And that's probably, again, thinking of the better use of your money, looking at how can we zone it so that we don't have to run the whole thing, or even that section so much. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you, Dave. Yes, Doug Kelly.
Yes, one of the things that I kind of pointed out that we were talking about LED replacement. We have a building that's 38,000 square feet. We underwent a project which the state of Colorado helped to give us a kickback, if you will, or rebate on buying those LEDs. We replaced every light in our whole building with LEDs. We also did, which is another point that might be brought up, is your outdoor lighting for your parking lots. One, they're on timers. We changed them out. We had to hire a company to come out to do it, but the energy savings from those, changing those to LEDs. Now, we did get a few complaints from neighbors saying that, oh my, they're much brighter than they were. But, we tried to offset that yes, we're helping our environment as well and cutting down on energy costs. That's in addition, we've done a whole array of solar energy that we've done for probably 6-8 years. So yeah, that just good points to keep in mind.
Say I've
Thanks a lot.
seen some parking lots do solar lights, like specific, was it so that because they're located out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, that actually they get a lot of sun, and yeah, those are a great, again, another big light that's constantly on that people don't think about. It's a great point.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Lighthouse kind of got you, Alex, you all got your start designing and building those kind of lights.
Yeah, we used to build them at a factory up in Hibbing back in 2009 when the technology was just coming out. So, I mean, it's made long strides too from what it, like Anne was saying, that annoying kind of light, maybe it flickers a lot or whatnot. It's not dimmable. All that stuff has been solved, but enormous advances have been made. The solar power, we did do a few of those lights up in Duluth for the Duluth Transit Authority, and the technology's not there just yet to do it in Minnesota. It's not time tested. Let's put it that way. But most of you guys who have a 240 volt circuit running to your parking lot poles, it's important too when you do something like that all the anxiety is taken out of that project, because they can really annoy the neighbors, and you need specifically focused lenses. You need installers who install them just the right way so that they're not doing that. And also, if you get outdoor lights that are in a warmer color temperature, like around 3000 K, they'll reduce the disruption to the wildlife around the building too, and circadian rhythm disruption, which is also a thing to think about lighting when you make it brighter too. It's annoying, but I love lights. I'm probably taking too much of your time. Used to make.
Thanks there. Thanks a lot. Any other questions out there? Okay, well, I want to say again, a big thank you to Anne Gerrietts for being here with us. What a great presentation. Thanks for that whole building walkthrough and all those different ways that you have thought about the buildings. And I hope that that's helped all of you to think more broadly about seeing your buildings as a real way to engage climate change. In particular, we find sometimes that congregations face climate change as a polarizing issue. And this is a way that, a small group of people can make a huge difference in a church and not kind of maybe trip that trigger that sometimes gets tripped in some congregations as it being a polarizing thing. So I hope this brings green teams and buildings and grounds teams together to do work together for the earth. And thank you for all the work that you do around the state and in your congregations. I hope you all have a great evening, and Anne, thank you again so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks.